The reason why we want to conserve the wildlife is for generations to come, so they can appreciate the wildlife as much as we do.
My intention is for my wife and I kids. I'm just happy that our kids really in a
very busy agenda this morning. Welcome everyone to the Budget and Fiscal Affairs Committee meeting. With us this morning we have Mayor Pro Tem Ellen Cohen, Greg Travis from staff from District G, Councilmember Michael Kubash, and Councilmember Jack Christie, who is Councilmember Michael Knox. So the agenda we have this morning is the monthly financial report, followed by our long-term financial plan update, and then centralized grant writing principles for 2019. So Controller Brown and Director Emo. Good morning.
Good morning.
And I know, Controller, I think you're going to give us some information also on the pay parity issue and your analysis.
Yes,
okay, great.
If you'll allow me after my comments, I will do that. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm pleased to present the monthly financial report for the period ending August 31st. In the general fund, the Controller's Office is projecting an ending fund balance of $229 million for FY 2019. This is $3.7 million lower than the projection of the Finance Department. The difference is due to a $3.7 million revenue projection difference from Finance. Based on our current projections, the fund balance will be $72.5 million above the city's target of holding 7.5% in reserves. Our revenue projection is unchanged from the July report. There are no major differences on our revenue projection greater than $1 million in Finance. Total expenditure projections are also unchanged from the July report, and the projection does reflect an increase of $1.4 million in the fire department expenditures with a decrease of $1.4 million in general government expenses. In the enterprise funds, we are projecting no material changes in any of our enterprise funds. And if you look at our commercial paper and bonds, all of our variable rate debt is below the 20% threshold, except for C&E. We are working with them on a transaction that will lower that, hopefully, in the next upcoming months. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, firefighter parity, we've been asked to do an analysis, and if you allow me, I will let you know we have completed our analysis on Prop B. We shared that with the administration and council on Monday, and you should have all received a copy in your inbox. We also have copies that I believe we're distributing today. The Controller's Office analysis demonstrates that the annualized cost due to pay parity could be $85,153,817 beginning in fiscal year 2020. The $85 million increase does not include the 7% increase for the raises for the Houston Police Department. The proposed 7% raise will increase the fiscal impact of Prop B by $15 million in FY20 and $27 million in FY21, so that's a total additional of $42 million. This analysis required several assumptions and considerations which are footnoted in the parity analysis document in front of you. The specifics of this analysis are subject to change as the administration finalizes the details on implementation should the measure pass in November. As has been discussed around the horseshoe in recent weeks, it's clear that the city will need to take the steps necessary to absorb an additional $85 million in one fiscal year. Absent any meaningful expenditure reductions or revenue increases, it's also clear that the added expense will be unsustainable. The Controller's Office believes that a sustainable solution exists, but can only be achieved through negotiation and the collective bargaining process. It's through that process that the men and women of HFD should be able to negotiate a well-deserved raise, but also a well-deserved raise that the city can actually afford over the long term. So the Controller's Office is hopeful that a sustainable solution will be reached that will take care of both firefighters as well as our taxpayers. My office is happy to answer any questions regarding this, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Controller. Before we start with Director Emo, I'd like to welcome Councilmember Martha Castex Tatum and Councilmember Mike Laster and staff from Councilmember Brenda Starding's office. Good morning, Director.
Good morning. This is the 2+10 financial report for the period ending August 31st, 2018. Again, our fiscal year 2019 projections are based on the 2 months of actual result and 10 months of projections. For the general fund, our revenue projection is $17.3 million lower than the adopted budget and the prior month. This is due to lower than budgeted population estimates. We had used the U.S. Census Bureau as of May 24, 2018, which resulted in a lower property tax cap estimates. So we had lower our property tax projections because of that. Our expenditures projections remains unchanged from the adopted budget and the prior months. The only change in the expenditures, it reflects the $1.4 million increase in the Houston Fire Departments for the ambulance and safety equipment, which is offset by the transfer from the general government. We are currently projecting an ending fund balance of $232.7 million. This is $35.1 million lower than the prior month and 11.2% of the estimated expenditures less debt service and pay-as-you-go. We are projecting no changes for the enterprise fund and special funds from the budget and prior month. Update on the disaster recovery for the month of August, a total of 31 projects were submitted to FEMA, totaling about $61.9 million. Thank you very much, and that concludes our report.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Controller Brown. A couple council members in queue. Before we do that, I'd like to welcome Council Member Carlos Cisneros and Council Member David Robinson, fellow David Robinson. Council Member Kubash.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So, in the year 2019, of course, we're in 2019 now. Am I correct? The added increase in the pay parity would be a total of $42 million for the remainder of this fiscal cycle. Is that correct? And then it would increase to approximately $85 million afterward, not including the 7% pay increase to the police department.
That is correct.
So I've never been really satisfied with the response from either of you concerning the $90 million that was passed by Prop H in 2006. Either I don't have the accounting background to understand it, or perhaps you haven't broken it down into fifth grade language where I can understand it. One of the two. So where is that money, Ms. Nemo? Where is that? Are we still collecting the $90 million over the revenue cap for public safety? Where does that money go?
So the way it's stated in the Proposition H is the city can collect $90 million from the prior base, and so the base
Let's say that again.
From the prior base. So we
from
have
the prior base.
Base, right? So we have.
Now, what is a prior base for those listening?
So right now we have the allowable revenues based on the Prop 1 calculations, right? So that would be the starting point. So the 90 million is going to be, added on top of, the Prop 1 calculations for that, for that year. So the Prop 1, and correct me if I'm wrong, Controller, the Prop 1 and Prop H is to calculate the allowable revenues for the property tax revenues.
You've lost me.
I'm sorry, but
let me step in. Y'all got to break it down a little simpler to me than that. I'm just not catching up.
No, this is a very complicated, and I'm happy. We have done an analysis. I'm happy to sit down with you and walk you through. But
well, let me just ask you this question, because I know the clock's going to run, and I'll have to get back in the queue. Are we collecting the $90 million over the revenue cap right now for public safety? Yes or no?
The answer is yes, but you have to understand, I think what Ms. Email was trying to articulate is the $90 million allows us to lift the maximum allowable revenue, property tax revenue, from Proposition 1 by $90 million. So it is not that we are getting an additional $90 million every year in tax revenue into the city coffers. It does not translate to that. And we've done an analysis, and I'm happy to share that with you, but incrementally we're getting much less per year, substantially less.
But isn't that what the charter amendment said, Prop H? Was it not a charter amendment? Was it a charter amendment, Prop H?
Prop H, yes.
2006.
Yes.
So it was for public safety.
Yeah.
And it's for each year, not just that 1 year.
Right. For each year, it allows us to lift the maximum assessed valuation of the Proposition 1 revenue cap. So it is a complicated.
Mr. Chairman, let me ask you this, Mr. Chairman. Do you understand this? I mean, you're the only accountant here at the table that I know of.
Not really. I'm trying.
Okay, thank God.
I'm trying to figure out if this is in relationship to under the Bill White administration, it was changed. Is this predicated by that change?
Well, it was voted on during the Bill White administration, but there was also some discussion around the legal interpretation of this, and I would refer that back to legal as to how they decided to interpret it. But we have taken their interpretation, and we've continued to apply it going forward. And again, happy to sit with you, council member, and share the analysis that we have to this.
Do we need legal here?
Well, I think what happened, correct me if I'm wrong, when this proposition was passed, it implemented the revenue cap. Then in the Bill White administration, he asked for some leeway with the revenue cap directed to public safety. Right. The administration today has taken that leeway and moved it from the White administration to the Parker administration, now in the Turner administration. So it's moved throughout the administrations because of the vote that we had under the Bill White administration. So the true revenue cap, if it would have been, correct me if I'm wrong, if it would have stayed in place, it would be substantially lower than it is today. But because the voters during the Bill White administration gave the city a little leeway for public safety issues, which you now take that and apply it today to public safety, we have a little bit more revenue, but it doesn't move it doesn't increase at an increase in rate. It moves concurrently with what the ordinance that was passed in the Bill White administration.
So the bottom line is, do we get the $90 million over the revenue cap for public safety, yes or no?
Yes. I think.
They said no.
Okay, so. No, they said yes.
We do,
but it's not $90 million.
It doesn't translate because you have to multiply that by the tax rate. So it's an increase in the total assessed values. So you don't get what I'm trying to make the clarification. I think there's been some confusion about this. Is that every year we're getting an additional $90 million in cash into the bank account to pay on public safety, and that's not how, unfortunately, the calculation works out. So again, I'm happy to share with you the analysis, and you can see the impact. And as a controller, we're looking at cash in the bank, how much money is coming in as a result of this. And
can we just have a breakdown of how much we're getting
yes.
each year since 2006?
And we'll make sure that we get that.
Because that's just confusing to me.
You're correct. To every council member.
We'll provide it to you.
Okay. And
Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Councilmember Robert Gallegos and Vice Chair Amanda Edwards and also staff from Councilmember Jerry Davis's office. Councilmember Jack Christie.
Just want to make a few positive comments. I like the term from one of you, hold on spending. The other one, spending is the same. When we have impending deficits and/or additional costs, we have no choice. We have to stop spending, hiring freeze, whatever it takes to face the future. And then the debt threshold's the same, no increase there. So it's a good report. Thank you very much.
Mayor Pro Tem Ellen Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. Controller Brown, I have a question for you. Does your estimate include overtime for HFD? And
Yes.
if it does?
Well, let me be clear on that. Our analysis is basically looking at the scenario in the sense of if we are hit with this charge, and one of the things that we took into one of the things that basically doing the calculation we looked at is if we are hit with an additional, let's say 98 million, we think it's 85 million, there's a high likelihood that we're not going to be increasing our overtime budget. So most likely we're going to have to make cuts in personnel, which I think the administration has already said. So if we are cutting personnel, we are also going to be cutting overtime. So we're not including to that same degree, I think, that the administration is. There are differences in the assumptions, and I think ultimately the challenge is twofold. Number one, defining pay parity, what exactly is pay parity, and we have to do that through some type of mutually negotiated agreement. Until we get together and we say what is exactly included in this, it's very difficult to quantify exact numbers. And I think the question that you're raising is why are our numbers different than finance? And that is truly the answer until we get everyone in a room to say, okay, this is how much overtime we're including. This is how much patrol pay increase. This is how much all these different things, and we're clear as to exactly what the increase in costs are. It's very hard to quantify the total amount of increase for this initiative.
If I could add, Councilmember, so when we do our calculations, our analysis, it's based on what is the cost based on the petition language. So in our analysis, we do include overtime. We do include the clothing allowance as stated in the petitions, that is in addition to what they currently have. We do include patrol pay based on the fire suppression. So the way we calculate it is based on what the language states. So in that way, we know exactly the cost that it's going to be costing the city. So based on that, that's when we have to start looking into initiative. I think your calculation or analysis probably already assuming some of those initiatives to be done.
Last year it was estimated between 2 and 3 million, and so I guess my question is,
there's already.
Are we taking that into consideration?
Yeah, there's already overtime included, so
sorry.
There's already overtime included in the current calculation. So the initial, and again, I think this is right. This is a part of the independent analysis that if we see large cuts, which I know the mayor has said, in personnel as a result of this, we're going to see decreases in overtime. So net, I don't think we're going to see an increase. Therefore, that's the difference.
So just to be really clear, Director, you include everything.
So I include
Controller,
right. I included calculations. Right. So when we did our calculation, it was back in July. So we used the head count as of July, and we used that number based on the same head counts at the time, and translate that to what the police officer is going to be making based on the pay parity stated in the petition language. With that, of course, that would increase your overtime because the overtime is driven by the pay. So we do include overtimes in there too. Like Controller said, it does have a lot of assumption that has to be interpreted from the petition itself. So that may be one of the major differences that we have. But our number is based on the way it's stated. If it asks for fire suppressions, our calculation is for those in fire suppressions to be.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to be clear. My last sentence is, Director, you include it. Yes. Controller, you do not.
Yeah, incremental overtime, we did not.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, your number is 85 million. Your number is
98.
98. Mm-hmm. And just to clarify another part, every single shift in the Houston Fire Department includes 7 hours minimum of overtime, correct? Because they work 47 and a half hours and they get paid overtime in every shift.
46.7.
47.
Yeah.
So your analysis includes that extra overtime built into every single shift.
Mm-hmm. I believe so, yeah.
Okay, does yours, Director?
No, well, our number includes the overtime cost. So with the increase in pay, of course, you would have more overtime cost.
Councilmember Laster.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little frustrated this morning, so if it comes out, just kind of let the universe hear about it. I want to follow up on what Councilmember Kubosh began with, and then if I can, I'm going to try to get around to another set of questions about the fire pay. But I, too, have been under the misimpression since day one that we were working on a public safety element of the amounts of monies that can come in over the revenue cap of $90 million a year, annually, each year. Until this year, when it's my memory of when I've first been told, or I first understood that it's not $90 million each year, it's a $90 million total. Is that correct? I mean, you can't get into my mind.
A total of $90 million each year.
Okay. The way y'all answer this confuses people more and more and more. Is there, when we passed this public safety exception to the revenue cap, was it a total of $90 million until forever, or was it $90 million each year?
The answer is it's $90 million each year.
Okay.
The clarification point is it does not mean that the city is taking in cash to the bottom line an additional $90 million every year. Think of it like your homestead exemption.
Why not?
Because the way the calculation works is it lifts essentially the Prop 1 cap by $90 million. So then we have to multiply that by the tax rate. So the effective amount.
Well, when did we do this? 2004? 2005?
Yeah, 2006.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can clearly show us how much that has given to the city over and above the revenue cap for each year, right?
Yeah, but when I'm looking at the amount, again, as the controller, I'm looking at the amount of cash that we have received into our bank account.
Okay. So what has been the average amount over and above the revenue cap that we've received each year since we passed it?
In cash, I believe, and I want to clarify with a follow-up, and I'll send it to you. The first year, we had about $40 million increase in revenue.
Because of that?
Because of lifting that cap. But the
exception to the cap.
The subsequent years, it's been closer to $2 to $3 million. And in some years, we haven't seen anything because of the way the revenue cap calculation works. But in total, the actual amount of money that we have been receiving, in every year.
Same way ever since we started in the beginning, right?
Yes.
I'll give you a little leeway with that thought.
When can we get a chart and a list that says exactly how much extra money came to us each year and is projected to come to us on the basis of the exception to?
Very quickly.
Yeah.
Okay. Put me back in the queue, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
So let me understand this. When Prop H first passed, from what I understand, it said we could collect up to $90 million over what is restricted by the revenue cap on property taxes. Is that correct?
Right.
Have we ever done that? Have we ever collected $90 million as the Prop H says we were supposed to do?
Actual in $90 million in revenues and property tax revenue additional? I don't believe so, no.
But that's what it said.
I think the language, and again, I think we have to refer this back to legal to get an interpretation. I think what it says is we will increase the Proposition 1 cap by $90 million. So the way the calculation works, that's the basic total assessed valuation of property increase.
For calculations, we do include what was stated back in 2006 charter.
Say it again.
We had included 6.
Is the method in the charter amendment?
To add the $90 million for public safety.
But is this method, this calculation formula, is it in the charter amendment?
I have to refer to how legal interpreted, but we have not changed our interpretation on the method and the calculations of the Prop 1 and Prop 2.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be honest with you, I'm just lost, and I think I'm getting more lost, and forgive me for not.
I think we all are somewhat lost on this subject, but
And know why we're not doing it if we're allowed to do it.
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you very much.
let me see take a shot at this. Revenue cap brings in X amount of dollars. By law, we are able to go up to $90 million over X amount of dollars. Mm-hmm. But there's a calculation that occurs that takes into consideration the different formulas, not only the tax rate, but I guess it's the cost of living formula in there. Right. And in many cases, when you do that, it comes out less than the $90 million. So the application of the cash in bank is actually somewhere between $45 and $90 million historically over the last number of years since the Bill White administration.
That is correct.
So what we'd like to see is the formulas that are involved to have that 90 million. Why does it move down to 45 in some cases, and why sometimes is it actually 90 million that goes into our bank account, which is cash on hand?
Yeah, again,
So
we'll get clarification. I think this is a great discussion. This is complicated stuff, and we're happy to educate people and make sure that we're all in.
Okay, but to me, if the Prop H says you can collect up to $90 million, that don't sound complicated to me, Controller. That just sounds like we're not doing it. I mean, I don't even know why there's a formula involved.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody on the street asked me, where did the formula come from? I don't know. I mean, $90 million, it just doesn't make sense to me. I can't add it up. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Knox.
Thank you. I thought I understood it, but I'm confused now as well. So we start from the base of, let's say this year, we have our property tax rate for the properties that we have in Houston this year. And then so next year, we'll add $90 million to that before we calculate the following year's tax rate. Is that correct?
We'll add to the maximum allowable revenue under Prop 1. We'll add $90 million to that.
Right. So when we're preparing for next year's budget, we have started with what we have right now, and then we calculate an additional $90 million into the property tax rate that we're going to charge people that live in Houston. And that's why it fluctuates, is because it's part of the whole, not in addition to, after you've made the calculation. Is that accurate?
I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to add more confusions, but if you understand how Prop 1 is calculated, that is the Prop 1 calculation.
CPI plus,
is the lesser of. If the lesser of the CPI plus populations from the previous index, or 4.5% of the prior year actual.
And we add the 90 million before we make that calculation. No,
you add the 90 million after you have calculated your Prop 1. So once you decide which one is the lesser of, then you add the 90 million on top of that.
And then you establish the tax rate to collect the 90 million.
Correct.
So it doesn't look like there's been any additional money, but there has been.
And again, it's
because that tax rate is going to have to account for the 90 million.
Correct. And then, of course, you also have to take into considerations on the market, how the actual property tax is collected at the end of the year, and that's somewhat of the variance on how, based on your property tax home values at that, for that year, the economy drive that too.
Well, I think although I think I'm getting a headache now, so thank you for that. Appreciate it. I mean, not thank you for the headache, but thank you for the explanation.
Sure.
Councilmember Martha Castex Tatum.
I have a question just on procedure. So the year that we collected the additional 45 million, how is that money disseminated? Where does that go?
Well, that money goes to finance, and then they would.
So property tax is 70% of our funding source in the general fund. Then you allocate those to the public safety departments and other departments in the general fund. So so 45 million or more than 45 million of that could be contributed to public safety departments.
So that money would have either gone to the police department or the fire department.
Correct.
That additional 45 million. Or if we only collect 2 million,
We
then you divvy
probably
that
allocate
up to
more
go.
than 2 million in that year. So there may be a year when you actually collect less on the Prop H, but we allocate those budget for those public safety departments more than what is stated in the Prop H.
And I would add, Councilmember, that we've actually asked this of Finance to provide a breakdown of how that money was spent. So I think they're working on getting
So
that.
we have those, yeah, and that's why we can provide you those data on, what has been spent on public safeties in the general fund.
Okay.
So I would ask this. So let me read the Proposition H. It actually read, shall the City of Houston be authorized to collect and spend $90 million for increased police, fire, and emergency medical services without raising the property tax rate? What I'd like to see is, since 2006, the analysis that gives us what was it before the 90 million and what was it after the 90 million, so that we can see the delta and why is that amount lowered or raised year after year after year. Does that make sense? Okay. So before we get into second rounds, a couple of questions. So, Controller, your analysis does include the overtime, the 46, 47 hours included in every base pay check for Houston Fire Department.
Yes.
What does this do to the infamous corridor that we have on the pensions? Does it blow up the corridor, meaning we have to pull benefits away from certain groups of employees?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think absent of having an actuarial firm do an analysis, it's a tough one to answer. I've heard arguments for either way, that the increased contributions can actually lower it, but I would assume that overall it would raise the corridor. But again, I honestly can't answer that effectively unless we get an actuary to actually do the numbers.
I have the same response. That needs to be done by the actual firm to calculate those informations.
So let's say it does blow up the corridor. Then we have to go back in negotiation with municipal employees, with police department employees, and fire department employees to pull more benefits away from them because of this pay parity issue, correct?
I believe this would only relate to fire because those are the increases, but you could also argue that if, depending on how pay parity is defined, it could also be including police. But again, we have to make that determination in the future.
Okay, in the, it does not include the Houston Police Department raise of 4%, correct, in your analysis?
It does not. And
Okay,
that would
so
be
that's
an
another
additional
part of the equation.
And we didn't include that because
so this, I'll give you
Councilman
everyone Dave Martin's opinion. Last week we received a notice from the mayor that said he's asking all departments to look at budget cuts. I'm not interested in cutting anyone's budget other than one budget, and that's Houston Fire Department. So when you come to me and say cut my city council budget, and I would argue that we're running pretty bare bones, as everyone around here is doing, and there are many departments like Parks and Recreation that do a good job of managing their budget. When you ask them to give more of your budget dollars up to support pay parity, I have a big problem with that. So it's going to be this council member's stance that when that comes up, I will not cut anyone's budget by 1 penny that was already voted on and agreed to by this council back in May, period. Councilmember Mike Laster.
Mr. Chairman, you're a hard act to follow, I swear. Going back to the questions that Councilmember Kubash and I were asking, I think you've done yeoman's work this morning trying to, again, explain to all of us. Councilmember Knox suggested it's brain gymnastics. I would suggest to you that the common understanding that we have tried to articulate this morning about what that proposition did is what average citizens believe we did, which was add an additional $90 million each year. So to the extent that it's brain gymnastics, I would suggest to you, and that this is not directed at you, but the truth of the matter is it's really about building, it adds to the distrust and the anger in the community of believing they have been misled. Now, I'm not suggesting to you that you're the ones that misled them, but I am wanting to know, where did the interpretation come from? Did that come from the then controller's office, or did it come from the legal department referencing the totality of the laws on how to apply the amendment? Do we know?
I think it starts with the ballot language and legal and how they interpret it, and then from that determination,
Well,
then
the ballot language is pretty simple,
Yeah.
as we've just read. So simple people like me and Kubash would hear that we get an extra $90 million. So it's the interpretation of the rules coming from the Comptroller's Office and the Finance Department and the Legal Department that have made this as complicated as it is. My question is, who pressed that? Were we under a threat of lawsuit if we did not interpret it more liberally?
I do remember that this discussion has happened before, and I think, again, that's why I would refer this back to legal to get some historic perspective on it. But I do believe that, if I'm recalling correctly, that there was some question and some discussion about this. I don't know that legal lawsuits were involved, but there was some discussion. There was a determination made, and then from that point, we followed the directive.
Well, thank you. And again, I'm sure we'll have this conversation again, but whatever information you can help us get the baseline on that would be helpful. So, Mr. Comptroller, on the numbers in relationship to the pay parity,
yes.
You're estimating for the remainder of this year the cost factor would be roughly $42 million, and then thereafter it would be about $85 million. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that's a differential of what we were using the amounts of $98 million based upon your testimony last month. So it's roughly $13 million plus or minus, right?
Right. And if I may just interject,
yes.
It's unclear as to when this would take place. We are estimating that, similar in the fashion of the pension reform, voters approved it, and then it took place within the beginning.
Yeah, this assumes an automatic enforcement if in fact we pass it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, my guess is that if we pass it, it's not going to be. We're just going to be in lawsuits until forever. But may I finish a question?
Yes, sir.
When I asked you last month how you came up with the calculations of roughly $98 million, you gave me a very good answer in relationship that I could understand, and you said you took the captain's level over here and the captain's level over here, and you did the differential, and you just added it all up. And I've actually used that definition to explain it to people. So I guess my question goes to this. I know that there's right sizing that has to happen after a while, and Mr. Comptroller, I think that you've done that here, attempted to do that. But there are going to be people that will point to these numbers to say, see, they're lying to us all again because they can't get their numbers right. Is there a reason why the Finance Department and the Comptroller's Office cannot come out with a combined, agreed-upon set of numbers when we start out on a project so there's not this back and forth and presumed somebody's got more knowledge than somebody else? Every month, y'all give us a report, and there's a differential. And you always explain the basis of the differential. And each month, that's okay. But for a lot of people, they see these numbers and they say, well, why would you have such a disparity of that? Please address that issue.
So from our perspective, yes. So there's two components in the petitions. You have the base pay to be paid the same, and you also have the other pays, the incentive pay. So we define, what is included in the patrol pay, education pay, tuition reimbursement, and so forth. So yeah, on the base pay, it is a straightforward calculations, right? You have the firefighters today at making this amount. You have the police officers today, and we have the information of what is the pension rate for fire departments, for firefighters. So we applied that to the base pay. I think our variance for the base pay is slightly, but hang on, let me see.
Well, I guess the question is, why does there have to be a variance? Why can't you get together and sit down and agree on the basis of operations? Is there some law that says you guys can't agree?
Well, I'll answer that question from a different perspective. You all, I believe, tomorrow are voting on an HPD contract. That contract was negotiated. Every single one of these items that you look at on my sheet have been defined legally and agreed upon by both parties. Okay. So we know what's included. We know how much the costs are going to be. We have all that. We do not have that with the fire department. So it is, I'm going to not say impossible, but it is almost impossible for us to determine exactly what these cost.
And why do you not have that?
Because there's no agreement in place. And until there's an agreement in place.
Because there's no settled
It's like
amount.
building a house. How many rooms are you going to have? How many square feet? Until everyone
agrees.
It's
not a matter of them withholding information.
No, I think it's a matter of negotiating as to what is going to be included in an agreement going forward. So once we have that, as we have with, if you look at the numbers between us and finance on the HPD agreement, they're exactly the same, because we went and looked at the same agreement and we basically said, these are the costs, and we added it all up, and there's no disagreement as to what is or what is not included. So I will say that until we have something in place, that neither of us are probably right. Sorry to make it more complicated.
That's very helpful, but thank
Okay.
you very much. I
Sorry.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Kubash.
Concerning firefighter overtime, Ms. Nemo, so everything over 40 hours is overtime?
So the way we have it, so the way they operate today is the way how we calculate the cost. So if they're still, their overtime cost today is.
So let me ask you a question. So everything over 40 hours a week is overtime?
Yes.
Now you know that it's 46.7 hours, right?
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Overtime is after 46.7 hours.
Right.
Well, I mean,
I'm calling my expert. Okay.
So Mr. Jones is going to come and help us?
So 46.7 is the calculation right now.
So it's not 40 hours.
So it's not 40 hours. Okay. Well, we need to know that, because we don't want to, I like the way that Councilmember Laster put it, it gives the citizens another opportunity to say that we're not being forthright with them and open when we start talking about the 98 million, we're not getting it. I like the way you explained it. I'm going to try to get that on tape and try to copy that. You did a great job on that. So anyway, we want to know how much money's been collected, but even more than that, where did the money go? Did it go to public safety? Do you have an accounting, a special account we put it in, and it went to public safety?
So that's what I'm going to give the data to you on what has been spent on public safety since 2006. So you can see how much has been spent every single year, the increases every single year.
And so we'll know, it'll be itemized, so we know that all the money collected under Prop H has gone to fire, EMS, and police.
Correct.
And that is, and you know that.
That's what I'm going to provide it to you.
Correct.
Okay.
So you will provide the 2006 till today, and the delta between what it was and what it ended up being because of the 90 million, correct? Perfect.
So let's be careful about talking about overtime whenever a 40-hour work week would be overtime for most people, but it's not for fire. It's 46.7 hours. Let's make sure we get that out there so that we get proper information to the public. Thank you.
Correct. Needless to say, this is a very complicated issue. But we can't go out and represent that we know the facts when we actually don't. So anything that gives us a more transparent position would be great. So thank you. Staff from Councilmember Jerry Davis' office. Mr. Sam DK.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What was the fiscal 2006 tax rate?
The fiscal
combined tax rate. Fiscal year 2006. Do you happen to know that?
63.875 cents.
Okay. Is it fair to say that the limitations of Proposition H were limited to the combined, whatever we receive, the revenues we receive actually, are limited to the combined tax rate, whether our combined tax rate is at or below the fiscal year 2006 combined tax rate?
Our combined tax rate today is much lower than the 2006,
So would our revenues be limited to whatever that combined tax rate is for 2006? Does that make sense?
No. Would our revenues be limited to what it, if we didn't have Prop 1? I mean,
yeah. So we could go up to 90 million above the actual in collection of revenues if it is at or below the 2006 fiscal year.
Over the Prop 1 calculation,
yes.
Maximum allowable rate each year, and this is I think part of the confusion is we do that calculation every year, so every year this number is changing. Yeah. So the incremental difference changes from year to year. And again, I think we'll be happy to share an analysis, but I think it's a good discussion, and I think it's one that we want to make sure everyone's comfortable with.
Okay, thanks.
Is it an accurate statement to state that since 2006, our tax rate has decreased every year except for this year, and the reason why it didn't decrease is because of the impact on home values due to Hurricane Harvey? Is that correct?
I believe that's the impact. I mean, we had a basically reduction in total assessments, so as a result, we used that tax rate to stay within the maximum allowable Prop 1 rate. So for the first time in a long time, it actually went up. Right. But it has gone down, very small increase.
Right. But every year we've had a tax rate decrease while people pay more on their tax bills. It's because of the appraisal value of their homes multiplied times the lower end of the tax rate that gives them more dollars. So
that is correct.
I don't see any other council members in the queue, so thank you both for your presentation. Director Emo, do not move. And we will next have the long-range financial plan update with Director Emo and Human Resource Dependent Auditor Nicole Hare Everlin. And Will the Thrill Jones is going to be involved.
Okay. I just want to make sure that you have all the copies in front of you on the first quarter updates for the long-range financial plan while we're waiting on the slides to be loaded. Thank you. So, okay, moving to the next slide, please. So again, this is just an overview to remind everyone back in early September 2016, we know we have been under revenue cap, so we have been facing financial challenges. So back in September 2016, an independent consulting firm, PFM Consulting, was selected to develop a long-range financial plan to tackle the city's financial challenges. Because of Harvey, so the report itself was delivered at the end of 2017, and so February 2018 was our first initial presentations of PFM recommendations to the City Council. And so that includes the implementation recommendation and the cost impact for 7 initiatives back then for fiscal year 2019. Subsequently, Councilmember had also provided initiatives based on these PFM recommendations. And we will see those recommendations in the following slide. Moving forward, in July 2018, Chief Pena had presented options for revenue opportunities and restructuring of the fire departments, which was part of the PFM recommendations. I just want to remind everyone how that relates to the PFM recommendations. And today we will focus on the clawback language on the Special Revenue Fund and the dependent eligibility audit that will be presented by Human Resource Department. Next slide. I know this looks small, but I'm hoping you can see this. This is the council recommendation that was submitted back in July. So thank you for some of you who contributed to these recommendations. The one that are highlighted are the initiative that has been presented or will be presented in this fiscal year. As you see in here on fire items 14, 16, and 17, those are some initiative that has been presented by Chief Pena in July. And again, some of the healthcare initiative will be presented sometimes later on in this fiscal year. Next slide, please. Again, this is just a timeline based on what was from the previous slide and also based on the PFM recommendations. Item 1 to 7 is what has been presented back in February 2018. Item 8 to 10 are the recommendation that has been presented by Chief Pena back in July. Again, today we will be looking at the clawback language for the Special Revenue Fund and the dependent eligibility audit. What you will be seeing in the upcoming presentations will be the development of the strategic technology plan by Houston IT, OPEP, and the healthcare initiatives will be presented before the end of this fiscal year. Next slide. So again, moving on to the Special Revenue Fund. Again, this is one of the recommendations from PFM where we have to start looking into the fund balance on the Special Revenue Funds. And back in February of this year, we had informed you on the type of special funds. We have a restricted committed fund, and we do have some that are derived from the general fund. So based on that presentations back in February, we had been letting you know that we are looking into the fund balance policy at this time to establish a minimum and maximum fund balance for several of these funds. So the clawback language that we are proposing in this BFA is a minimum of 2 months of the expenditures and not greater than 4 months of expenditures relative to each of the special fund. So if the fund balance calculated in here is in excess of the 4 months expenditures, again, this is based on the average fund in excess of immediate 3 years audited expenditures less debt, then the excess fund balance of that funds will be transferred to the general fund at the year end. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, I was thinking. So if you see the following slides after that is the list of the special funds that will be impacted by this clawback language. Another reminder, in the fiscal year 19 budget, we had also adopted a budget that includes a $13 million revenues coming from the Special Revenue Fund as a result of this BFM initiatives. So we are currently working with legal departments an ordinance to be presented to the council for adoptions on the fund balance policy based on that proposed language that we had stated in the previous slide. So again, there's 12 special funds that we're looking at this point. So once the calculation is done for a average 4 months of the fund balance, any excess of that will be transferred to the general fund by year end. Next slide. Any question at this point? I think that concludes the presentations on the special fund. Before I move to human resource departments for the dependent eligibility audit, if there's any questions.
Yes, Vice Chair Amanda Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Director Emo, for your presentation. A couple of questions that I have. So the first of which will relate to the Special Revenue Fund. I understand that we're going to now have 13 million. Is that right? 13 million coming back into
that is what is
the coffers.
That was projected when we developed the adopted budget for fiscal year 19.
I thought it was 15. So I thought we were at 15.7 or something to that effect when we were in the budgeting process. So I was trying to figure out what the delta is between what we initially contemplated was being clawed back. I know that at that time it was not clear what the formula would actually be. So am I correct in stating that?
So I have to look into that.
So you're correct. I believe when we did the budget, we did say 15. Part of that was from the clawback language, but we also had some transfers from special revenue funds that wasn't a part of the clawback language, so it was added to the total that we expect to get from special funds.
But the 13 is only tied to the actual clawback provision.
Right.
The two additional million were from other methods of recovery from the special revenue funds.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. The other question that I have is to discuss in more detail a little more of the out years, longer term. When we had the PFM presentation several months ago, my question was for the out years. I understand we're talking about kind of what's immediately before us. I see OPEB, I see a number of mechanisms that are being implemented in the near term, but my question is longer term. When are we going to see a picture? And I know right now it's in flux because of what's happening with the pay parity question. But notwithstanding, when will we see a picture of the out years implementation strategy in totality so that we can see ourselves if we're going to be approaching a structurally balanced budget or not? That was a question I raised when we had the initial PFM report and wanted to get a better sense longer term, not just in fiscal year 19, of the approaches we'll be taking toward that.
And I don't have this in the appendix at this point, but if you recall back in February, we did lay out the timeline on how the initiative from PFM will be impacting future years. So health benefits and OPEB will be part of the fiscal year 20 to 22 time frame that we are presenting today. Once it's approved, the impact implementations could be recognized by fiscal year 20 or 22. Again, we talked about the public safety and shared services back in February that hopefully we will get the impact by 2022 to 2024. But we are presenting that in this fiscal year so that we can implement that in those out years.
May I get back in the queue, please?
Yes, ma'am. Councilmember Kubash.
Thank you very much. Concerning these special revenue funds, I'm looking at these. Now, the building inspection fund, is that the fund that we set up right at the end of Mayor Parker's term?
No. No, that was Planning Development Special Fund.
So that was number 9?
Correct.
And so the whole purpose for that fund was, can you explain why we created that fund? Do you remember why we created it?
I believe to improve the activities in that area, because they do have funding source coming from their planning fees. I could pull the ordinance and send it out to you.
I remember that. I remember some discussion about it. But so we're looking at taking 12 of them and basically doing away with them and merging the money into the general fund account. Is that correct?
Only if they have any excess fund balance from the maximum calculations.
But then we will do away with if that happens, will it have to come to council for us to vote to do this?
So if it's approved, then there will be a council actions adopting the policies.
Because it took council action to create the fund.
To create the fund, it does require council actions. At this point, these funds have been created, so we're not closing these funds. This fund will still maintain in the special funds. What we are talking about in here is adopting the policy. Any excess fund balance over and above the 4 months average of the expenditures, that excess will be transferred to the general fund.
So we won't be doing away with the funds.
No, the funds still exist.
Thank you.
Councilmember Christie.
Just to comment on page 4, the timeline and upcoming presentations. Number 1, we've been developing a strategic technology plan as we go the last couple of years, so it's been good. But if it's hits only, then I'll await that. But number 2 and 3, OPEB and healthcare initiatives, I don't think we can wait till the fourth quarter of FY19. I think PFM report, that should be up top, because OPEB is almost metastatic on our finances. It is eating away just like the pensions did, and we need to solve it. And that should be yesterday instead of fourth quarter. And then healthcare initiatives, I've been going to their quarterly meetings, personnel, the drug companies, the hospitals, Kelsey Sebo. We know what can turn it around. 6.5 years, we took it from in the red to in the black. Employees are healthier because they're taking better care of themselves. They're supporting this system. We know the answers. We just got to implement them more. I've always said there's 5 cost area items that are just out of control. And it's the same in Medicare and Medicaid. And nobody's fixing the problem. And so I think that should be a priority. It's just a comment. It should have been formulated yesterday instead of fourth quarter 19.
If I could add, so yes, the OPEB is one of Mayor Turner's high priorities. So we have been engaging with a consulting firm at this point to do this analysis. So once it's complete, it's what we're planning to present to you. And I think that's why it's, at this point, it's estimated to be in the fourth quarter, but as soon as we have that done, then we can present it to you. So these dates could change, but I don't have that at this point. So but we are currently engaging consulting firms to look into our OPEB.
Thank you. Councilmember David Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Emo, I appreciate the savings that these funds, I'm looking at page 6, the special revenue funds listed 1 through 12. So appreciating that we are saving money and sending funds back to the general fund when we're not spending these monies. I think it would be helpful if we could see the definition. You know, if a definition is best described as it was originally outlined in an ordinance or a vote at council, however these funds were created, I'd like to see the definition of each one of them. I know it might be a little bit of an effort to to find them and bring them to council. But here's why. I'm thinking about those 12. So let's just take number 3, the Health Special Revenue Fund, which, you know, perhaps Dr. Lee and Dr. Christie might think that we should be spending every penny that we have on health. You know, why would we be giving money for a Health Special Revenue Fund back? Why aren't we spending it? You know, it's great that we're not spending it, but if it's a fund there to be spent, I'd like to know, you know, first of all, whether we didn't need, you know, presumably we didn't need it all for whatever the mission is. But then again, thinking about swimming pool safety, number 12, if you're the parent of the one child that died in the pool this year, you're probably wondering why we didn't spend every nickel in the account. So I'm concerned about why we're not spending Parks Planting Tree Fund money, number 8, or maybe why we're not spending every nickel on historic preservation from that fund, number 5. So, you know, hats off, kudos, well done on every nickel we save, but if it's there for a purpose, why aren't we spending it? And I know this city has been historically in a great deal of trouble, for instance, because we haven't been able to spend our housing money. We're in trouble and have been in a lawsuit with HUD and various other entities for that, not to mention sanitary waste. You know, so is 11, the Special Waste Fund, something we should be spending? Is number 4, the Housing Special Revenue Fund, something we should be spending? I'd like to know, you know, why and what it's for. What's your thoughts on that?
So, yeah, I know we had presented this back in December, but I'm more than happy to send you the presentation that has the background and the ordinance of each of the special funds, so you do have those informations. So additionally, the funds that are listed in here, I don't want to say that we don't spend them today. Some of that has been spent. If you look into your MOFAR does include special funds as well. So you can take a look, and some of those funds, their funding source and the expenditures and their fund balance as of today. So I just want to point it out to you that some of the special funds are reported in this MOFAR.
Yeah, I'd appreciate seeing what you've referred to, and any definition or the ordinance language would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Vice Chair Amanda Edwards.
I'm just getting back into the queue to finish or wrap up my question. So you're describing the kind of the out years question, or you were describing the out years question. And so can we have a chart or something that is comprehensive in nature that shows us not necessarily if our goal, let me back up and not be presumptuous here. If the goal is to reach a structurally balanced budget, then when that goal would be achieved in theory if the certain strategies are mapped out, or if our goal is something else close to structurally balanced or whatever the goal is, identifying that in terms of, so we have a universe of things that are coming in the near term, longer term, in terms of what we're actually trying to implement, rather than just what strategies that PFM recommended to us that we could consider. So I'm looking a little bit more, and I understand that there might be hesitancy to lock that in because circumstances and situations change, as we're now witnessing with the pay parity issue. So I'm fully aware of that, but conditions being consistent, that's the question.
Yeah, so we can provide you the matrix or the charts that you're talking about. So you're right. So what we're looking right now, PFM does break down the analysis based on, this is the short term and long terms. These are the initiative that you have to look at, because it does require more study analysis before you implement that. So I can provide you the matrix on what we'll be presenting this fiscal. Of course, you have to present it today to be implemented in the next year or 2 years. But what we're looking right now is what can be done in the short term, short run. I know special fund is one of them, but yeah, I will provide you the
And
matrix.
just to be very, very clear, I want to make sure we're not doing that in a vacuum as an exercise, just as an exercise. What I would like to tie it to is impact, right? So we can talk intended impact as a result of those particular reductions. And so if these 1, 2, 3 don't get us to structurally balanced, let us know that. Or if they do, let us know that as well, just so that we have a sense of not just we're moving in a particular direction, but we're achieving a particular goal if things remain consistent and constant, which I know is probably not going to happen because things are always in flux.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Thank you.
And Director, just to jog my memory, everybody's memory, in fiscal year 2019, in order to achieve a structurally balanced budget, we would have had to account for the retirees' benefit portion, which was, I think, $250 to $300 million. Is that correct?
All funds, right? All citywide, including the enterprise funds. So I have to break it down for the general fund piece.
Okay, but generally speaking, if we do adopt, and I agree with Vice Chair Amanda Edwards, if we do adopt a structurally balanced budget, we need to look at an additional $250 million minimum every year in cost savings in order to drive a structurally balanced budget. Right. On top of that, if pay parity passes, which I've stated publicly I think it will, then that's additional $100 million on top of that. So good luck with finding $350 million. Councilmember Kubash.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was looking here. There's a special, there's a police special service fund, 2201. It would be nice to have those numbers. Of course, you can find these numbers of the funds in the back of the MOFAR. Where's this money coming from? What source?
It's actually one of those hybrid funds, so they have multiple funding sources from outside agencies, from donations. So it's one of those special funds that's made up of many different funding sources.
Is it grant money as well, like for Bulletproof Vest? I mean, is this where they're able to secure things like that for the police officers?
There may be donations. I don't know if grant funds are included because they also have an asset forfeiture fund where they're able to buy like vests and equipment and things like that. So
the police special services fund is not asset forfeitures?
No, that's a separate fund.
Okay.
That's a restricted fund.
Yeah, I would imagine so. All right. I'm always hearing about them finding drug money with or street value of the drugs. I don't know if that's actually finding the money or not, but so. All right. Where does the? I'll pass.
Councilmember, there are no other council members in the queue. So, Director Emo, Mr. Jones, thank you for your time. We'll move on to the next subject, and that will be centralized grant writing.
We have the Human Resource Departments for the dependent eligibility audit presentations.
So make sure we get out of here in about another 60 minutes, max. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Nicole Hare-Everline. I'm the Assistant Director of Benefits for HR, and I'm presenting on the dependent audit findings for this past fiscal year. Please change the slide. Thank you. In response to findings in the FY14 Health Benefits Performance Audit that was conducted by the Controller's Office, the Human Resources Department is now actively reviewing employees' files with covered dependents. Covered dependents are defined as spouses and children that our employees have added to their health benefits plan. Please advance the slide. To increase the number of employees and retiree dependent verification compliance from 61%, in which we did have a outside consulting agency, Siegel, in August 2017 to review our files, we want to increase from 61% to 92.5%. Siegel Consulting came in August of 2017 and sampled 228 dependent files, and that's where the 61% derived from in terms of needing supporting documentation for validation for each covered dependent. Please advance. So our current state of dependent verification when an employee or retiree elects to add their child or spouse to our health benefits plan. The employee enrolls and selects dependent coverage, and within 30 days of their enrollment, HR requests that they provide the supporting documentation, and then payroll deduction begins even if the dependents have not been appropriately verified within the 30-day window. Advance, please. So our future state of dependent verification will add an additional step to our process in which the employee's benefits will remain frozen until verification is completed. So that additional step of verification of supporting documentation, until we get that birth certificate in, that marriage certificate, whatever that should be, then we will start in turn the payroll deductions for the employees. So our gap analysis process was completed in February 2018, February 22nd, and what we did was assess and revise the current process for risks, define verification requirements, and created our communication plan. Please advance. So stage 2 of this process of our 4 stages is to have a communication and file remediation process in which participants, i.e. employees, receive a letter announcing the beginning of the audit and deadline, and participants have the opportunity to submit their dependent verification documentation. Please advance. We started with the smallest population first, which were employees and retirees that covered their grandchildren. That particular population across our plans, limited plan, open access, as well as our consumer-driven health plan had 350 dependent files on that. During our processing, we noted and reached out to all 350 individual employees. 180 of them did in turn submit their documentations to verify their employees, and 170 dependents out of the 350 were terminated because they did not have the documentation to submit. This was completed a few weeks ago on September 21st, 2018. So, as you know, we have a large portion of our employees, over 90% of our employees, elect to carry city benefits. And so we faced this outlook or audit into 4 phases, as I mentioned. Our next phase will be the open access plan, in which 3,236 dependent files will be looked at. And then we'll look at the consumer health driven plan at 2,300 dependent files. And then our largest plan, which is the limited plan that includes Kelsey-Seybold, Memorial Hermann, and Renaissance, have 20,000 employed dependents on those plans as well. So that's our phase. It will take us at least what we're factoring a 24-month outlook to go through all of these dependent files and request the necessary documentation if needed to ensure. That's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Doctor. Quick question on the grandchildren part of that. Assuming that is a grandchild that's been legally adopted by their grandparents, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Christie.
These audits are good because the healthcare system, disease care system, there's unnecessary expenses in there, there's unnecessary coverage, and we just can't keep giving away the ranch. And you got to go over this with a fine-tooth comb, because if you give out and in our meetings over the years, we have found that spouses of the employee are more expensive. So that's why auditing for the process for risk is important. Now, why are they more expensive? City employees just don't go out and just marry sicker people. So there's got to be a reason. We've got to figure that out, because that's a cost item that we don't have under control. And verification requirements is like a good audit. So you're on the right track, and I'm glad you're doing it.
Thank you. Councilmember Christie, just to note to your comment, if we had to itemize who's the highest risk. It will be under 65 retirees, followed by spouses, then employees, and then the children on the plan costing the least.
Quick question. How many retirees do we presently have in the benefits portion of the plan?
So for this is the under 65 retiree portion, and it's approximately 6,500 to 7,000 under 65 retirees.
And what do they receive from the day they retired until they go to Medicare at age 65, 65 and a half?
Right. So their benefits actually looks very similar to the active employees' benefits. They have access to the 3 plans that we have access to: open access, consumer health driven plan, as well as the limited plan. There is one provisional plan called Retirees of Texas Optional Plan that has about 95 employees in that particular plan. So they have the same benefits that you and I have as employees.
And do they pay the employee rate, or do they pay a higher rate?
Their rates are different as retirees. It's not the same rate.
I'm assuming it's a little bit more.
It is a little bit more, yes, sir.
Okay. Councilmember Cisneros.
Thank you, Chair. Could you talk a little bit more about the children that were disqualified from the care from coverage from their grandparents? It was such an alarming reduction, almost half, and the numbers were big. And I just want to make sure I really understand what happened there.
Okay. So we went through the audit as I detailed, and we've given those individuals that had grandchildren on the plan 4 opportunities. We reached out to them personally by phone, automated call, by letter multiple times, to give them an opportunity to provide the documentation that they're still legally caring for their grandchild, either by having custodial rights, they're carrying them on their tax documentations. And then if they were able to provide that information to us, then we could move forward in extending them coverage. If they were unable to provide that information to us, they term. Now, I have to say, caveat that conversation with some individuals opted to term because they're not caring for the grandchild any longer, or the parent have proper cause or insurances to carry the child. So some of those things came into play, but we made every effort and an attempt to communicate to them personally by, again, not just automated calls, but personal calls to each and every person on the list, as well as mailings and emails.
Okay. Do you have any reason to think that there are people that that weren't reached, that somehow there were other barriers? 4 attempts, that sounds like a lot, but I just want to make sure that we haven't inadvertently cut them out, and I understand it sounds like the intention certainly was to reach them, but do you see that maybe other barriers that were there that possibly exist? Or
of course, with any outreach, it's barriers noted, but again, we had a multi-module communication strategy by letter, by email, and by phone to reach out to them, and we've went back if we were not able to reach them and consistently call those individuals if it was a question mark if they were able to be reached or not.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Kubash.
Thank you very much. How long have we been self-insured as a city?
We were self-insured in 2011.
I spoke to Hope's some of their retirees a while back, and they say they're paying a very high premium for their health insurance. Is there? Do we give any type? We don't give a break to people that have retired from the city that are still on our health insurance. Evidently, they're being charged more than when they were an employee. Is that correct?
Well, again, as mentioned earlier, retirees are one of the populations that drive costs, so they pay their appropriate share as it relates to premium contributions against the city. So, yes, they do pay a higher amount than active employees.
Yeah, I've talked to some of them who just about pay their whole paycheck into the healthcare system. Let me ask you this concerning dependents. I mean, if I adopt my grandchild, he's covered. No doubt, right?
If you have custody of your
I mean,
grandchild.
if I legally adopt
Yes.
him and a court orders it, then he's going to be covered. No question.
As long as you can provide that documentation, sir.
It would certainly be able to be provided. So how many defendant children have been adopted by their grandparents and that are on our plan? 180. All right. So then there's about termed.
So then your documentation to note that they are custodian of their grandchild.
So that barrier is going to be whether or not they have met the standard.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I understand that. I've adopted a child, and I got it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the next presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Centralized grant writing. Deputy Director Arif Rashid and Assistant Director Ms. Gloria Moreno. Good morning.
Good morning. Arif Rashid, Deputy Director of Finance. Last fiscal year 2019 budget, there was an amendment by the Council to provide a report on the centralized grant writing function. And we are here to present you the results of the study that we have performed. Gloria and I will present this to you. As you recall, we had an AP already put in place where we have a central lens function, and we will present in our report here the differences between those of the finance department within the city departments, across the city departments, and then also we talk about here and present to you now what our study from the other cities and municipalities across the city that we found. And with that, I will turn it over to Gloria to present.
So you'll see the verbiage that Councilmember Christie proposed regarding our budget amendment. I don't need to read it. You have it. The foundation was for our grant writing study. Slide number 4 indicates the roles of finance grants management versus the roles of city departments. As indicated, AP 4-1 states our grant acquisition, management, and compliance requirements for the whole city. We identify what responsibilities we have within finance grants management, what responsibilities we also have with the city departments. In and of itself, you city council members are also included in our AP because y'all have a role in grants because y'all have to authorize and approve departments to actually apply for the grants. So within grants management, we are the data owners of the grants module in SAP. So when people are applying for grants, they submit it to Finance Grants Management. We review their documents, ensure that the budgets are set up appropriately, put the documents in SAP, and monitor spending of those grants. We are also the coordinator along with the city's the single audit report. That's part of the city's CAFR, the annual audit that occurs, and so the single audit report is a strong part of that audit. We also track and monitor all of the data, and later on in the report, you'll see some of the data that we include with regards to grants management. Most importantly, we prepare policies and recommendations for grant departments to use regarding how to look for grants, where to look, and more importantly, on their responsibilities. When you look at city departments are the sole responsible people for applying, accepting, and spending the grant dollars. They identify cash match funds, and if those cash match dollars are required, they have to come up within their budget to identify where is that cash funding coming from. They also city departments identify internal controls and processes in order for them to monitor the compliance of their grants. They make a determination of whether or not that grant needs to come to City Council for approval. Just as information, if a grant is more than $400,000, City Council approval is needed. If there's a cash match requirement, City Council requirement is needed. So as an example, I like to tell our departments, let's say they're applying for a grant that's only $250,000, but it has a 10% match. Even though it's under the threshold, that cash match requirement requires City Council approval. Ultimately, departments are responsible for monitoring the programmatic and fiscal compliance of the grant itself, as well as their subrecipients. And then they are responsible for reconciling their expenditures and revenues, as well as closing out the grants on a timely basis with their funder. So you'll see the difference. We have to work tag team. There's nothing that a department can do without going through finance grants management, because we're ensuring that the data that's getting into SAP is accurate, so that in order reports can be generated and we can be in compliance with our federal and state requirements. Moving on to the next slide, you'll see the primary grant opportunities that are received within the City of Houston. Overwhelmingly, most of the grants that are received by the city come from pre-existing relationships with their funders. They're recurring grants that we get repeatedly year after year. A second type of opportunity is what we call formula grants. These are grant dollars that the City of Houston, because of who we are, in particular the Community Development Block Grants, it's a set formula through HUD that we receive a specific allocation. I also kind of put the Homeland Security grants in that example as well, because they get recurring grants as well. We talk about formula grants. The next one that comes out of, and I know the next group that's going to be talking on our intergovernmental relations team behind us, they release notices of funding availability that goes to every city department's director. And these are new opportunities. These are opportunities that are being released through the feds so that department directors can identify, hey, is this a new opportunity that we might want to go for? So we call them NOFAs, but it's a notice of funding availability. The last is eCivis. The city's general fund, budgeted through the finance department, identifies every federal, state, as well as private foundation funding availability that's departments can go and look for. We have unlimited licenses in the City of Houston so that any city department, any of your staff, for example, if y'all are interested in looking for grant funding, let us know. You can get access to the search engine to see what kind of funding opportunities are available. So those are our primary grant opportunity primary sources. If we look at slide number 7, I wanted to share with you kind of where we are with regards to our grant applications, awards, and amounts. So it's basically our trend analysis. This was done and it's identified. We prepare this again as part of our normal dashboards, but you'll see by department the number of applications starting from 2016, the number of awards, as well as the award amounts. And so you'll see that 3-year trend history. I kind of wanted to just highlight that for 2018, you'll see a humongous jump, right? Part of that overwhelmingly is because of Harvey. The finance department received that $163 million as an expedited FEMA funding, and we also got the $50 million grant from the Office of Governor. So you'll see a huge jump in finance on where those funding came from. Additionally, you'll see with the Housing Department, remember they received a huge grant opportunity through the General Land Office, about $424 million or so. So that kind of explains that. But overwhelmingly, you can see which of these departments are really looking for grant dollars, which are not, and you'll be able to, and this will be kind of important as we look and move to slide number 8, which identifies, and this is kind of the meat of the study, it identifies by department the total number of positions that staff who touch grant writing alone. I want to kind of emphasize that because that's not necessarily grant management, it's not necessarily grant reporting, it's the staff who are actually writing the grants by department. So you may have a department that might have 3 people that touch grant, but if you look at the amount of time they spend actually writing that grant, we equated that to FTE. So you can see under that peach color column how the FTE amount translates to the number of positions by department. We then identified what percentage of those FTEs are to the total positions, as well as those costs affiliated to grant writing alone. Again, wanting to emphasize grant writing, not grant operations. And so one of those that I wanted to highlight, you can look at the health department. Health department has 62 people that touch grant writing. But if you look at the number of FTEs, it's only 24 FTEs. So of that, of the staffing, 39% of the FTEs go toward grant writing activities, which come out to a tune of $2.6 million. If you went back to look at slide 7 and looked at the health department award just most recently, they get $66 million in grant funding. So they're spending $2 million going toward grant writing, but they received over $66 million. So you'll see that kind of correlation. You'll see some other examples where you have departments who are really looking for grants, but unfortunately may not have been awarded. And so as we go to the next slide, which was slide number 9, we can identify some of the pros and cons on this idea of should the city consider centralizing grant writing tasks, right? So I've identified some of the pros, and some of the pros predominantly are that you would have at least identified staff. Some of the departments that are resource limited, meaning they don't have a lot of staff just sitting around looking for grants or writing grants. So if we did have a centralized grant writing program, at least we could identify that staff to provide technical support for those departments who don't have staff, right? On the con side, though, you'll see that subject matter experts are key in writing a good grant, especially when you have departments that have operational needs, whether it be public safety, whether it be Homeland Security, Parks Department, Health Department. Those subject matter experts in those departments, they know their stuff. They are the best equipped to identify operationally what's working in the department, what's not, and more importantly, they have those established relationships with the funders on where is the funding going to be coming from in the future. So that subject matter expert and that relationship building would probably be the biggest cons of not instituting a centralized grant writing program. You will see that I've listed at least 5 or 7 different pros and cons for both. I don't want to repeat everything that's listed here because you do have it, and I think we're kind of under a little time crunch. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you have regarding that. As part of our study, we did reach out to several cities to identify what happens with other cities. So on slide number 11, we looked at key cities within the state of Texas as well as within the country to see how do they handle grant writing activities. So you'll see the summary there. Overwhelmingly, you will see that nobody really has a centralized grant writing office. You'll see particularly that grant offices are occurring there in departments for those respective grants that they're seeking. And on slide number 11, the city of Dallas really kind of also strongly uses the process that we have in the city of Houston, where it's a hybrid model. You know, where most of the formula grants are handled by individual departments, and then it comes through a fund development office, which is equating to our finance grants management team here within the city of Houston. So what does this mean when you look at the data, when you look at the pros and cons, when you look at what's going on with all of the comparison cities that we have? In the finance department, the study basically concluded that we're recommending a hybrid system of grant writing. That hybrid system would ensure that subject matter experts stay within departments receiving significant grant funding, more importantly, have the operational needs, that subject matter expertise, whether it be public safety, whether it be from the health department's end. Because of the operational needs of the department, we really believe subject matter experts should remain within those departments. We don't want to contribute to a brain drain, if you will, pulling that knowledge base out and then leaving these departments without those established relationships that they have with their funders. The next bullet, well, before I get to the next bullet, even when those grants are being sought by the subject matter experts in those departments, that continuous coordination with our team to ensure that we don't have departments conflicting against each other, going against each other with a funder. When I was hired, Mayor Parker basically said, Gloria, we have situations where where departments are applying for the same amount of money, and it's conflicting on what the plan is with the city of Houston. So we have put a lot of processes in place in order to ensure that we don't have that conflict. And believe me, that process works. There are times when I'll get a call from a funder that says, wait a minute, you have some applications that look really kind of similar. It's like, no. So we'll be able to identify this department is applying for component A versus component B. So I think those processes have worked. The second part of the recommendation, though, is that it would be helpful for departments that are staff limited, resource limited, to have grant writers available. And I identified particularly those departments. So we're talking about ARA, Department of Neighborhoods, Fleet, libraries, human trafficking, municipal courts, OBO, OEM, planning, as well as solid waste. These departments, and you can compare with what kind of funding they already received, where we could probably benefit more if they had more dedicated staff to assist with the grant writing. And so that would be the second part of the recommendation. So that's the gist of the study results that we have. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. And we have a few council members in the queue. Councilmember Christie.
If you go with a hybrid system instead of a general centralized system, is there any increased cost, any additional FTEs?
We recommended you would need, given the number of departments that would be relying on those grant writers, we're recommending an estimated cost of $230,000, which would be for 2 positions, because for the number that we're looking at, you can't just have one person being on call for the 9 different departments. So we are recommending 2 departments.
Okay.
2 positions.
Just make sure we get $10 million more in grants.
Exactly.
If you have a $200,000 increase. Okay, health department, parks, they do a good job of grant writing and receiving. I think a hybrid system would work because, like you listed, they're more dedicated to helping. The knowledge base, the organizational complement, the small departments would benefit, and you would streamline and avoid duplication. So, my request, and probably what promulgated the amendment to the budget, was the intransience of the fleet department. You have over $1 billion in federal government grants for clean air, alternative fuels, and there was probably 1% applied for, and 400,000 of that was I was embarrassing them to apply for something, and they stayed up late at night because they know I would tear into them. So do you have influence on, say, there's $1 billion here, I know it confuses your facts of where you want to go, but why don't we apply for it? Do you need city council pushing that? Do you supersede that? Because it just didn't make any sense to me. $1 billion laying there, and we're not applying for any of it because the intransience of not wanting to shift to cleaner fuels.
I can't address the issue about the shifting of cleaner fuels. However, I can say through that eCivis search engine that we have available, that department and any staff affiliated that the director would like to identify, giving them access, you can put, for example, key terms like clean fuel opportunities. They could get a weekly email, if you will, of what new money is being made available. So
but you got to open that email to get it, all right? So just any way you can encourage.
We'll reach out. We'll reach out.
You'll be more observant. One last comment, Mr. Chairman. The $50 million from the governor, that's not a formal application process, and Mr. Kelly will support this, that it's just pure political science that got that deal done. And so, some grants or money supersedes, just personal relationships and we don't have to do a full form. But that 50 million was political relationships.
It was a 2-page letter, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm.
Vice Chair Amanda Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your presentation, and I just want to, on record, thank you for the diligence that you spend. I know that over time our grants process has improved in terms of how we are judged in our compliance, and so I just want to thank you for not only keeping us compliant, but also helping us to generate more revenue. A lot of what we talk about is reductions, austerity measures, and so you all are a central component of helping us to generate the revenue that we need to function when other means of generating revenue have remained sparse and slim. So I just want to publicly say thank you for those efforts.
I appreciate it.
Councilmember David Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully a quick question for you, Ms. Moreno. On the chart on page 8, where we're looking at grant writing, the staffing summary, tell me what I'm looking at here, if you would, please. Top of the columns, responsible for grant writing, and 2 of our largest departments citywide, the Houston Police Department and Houston Public Works. The percentage of FTE to total positions, they're both at 93% and amount for quite a bit of money. Can you expand on what that refers to?
So that's solely for the grant writing component of the work. So with regards to Public Works, they do have other staff that really handle grant finance reporting, for example. They're doing all the reports to their funders. But if we look only at who's actually writing or applying for those grants with those 2 departments, it's the identified positions as well as those commensurate FTEs affiliated with those positions. So in other words, grant writing, council member, is not a full-time job. It's cyclical, most cases.
Right.
Sometimes with Public Works, you'll see it goes every 3 years because the funding don't get approved unless it happens on a 3-year cycle. So as a result, when it's not the heavy grant writing time, they're doing other tasks. And so that's why you'll see kind of a little disconnect, if you will, between the FTEs as well as the positions that are identified.
Okay, so in those cases, the total number of positions, we're talking about 3 and 9 over the entire department. The 93% really jumped off the page for me there for
right.
both of those departments, and that accounts for it. Thank you.
Councilmember Gallegos.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Gloria, in regards to district council members, if a district council member, let's say, has a project they like to get some funding for, and regarding one of these departments, let's say the Parks Department, let's say we have a park in one of our districts and we're needing some new play equipment or something, can we work with you and the Parks Department for possible a grant?
Yes. I would recommend you start with the Parks Department because it's their staffing who would actually be gathering the data and then submitting, because again, according to the procedures, the department director is responsible for applying, accepting, and spending the dollars. But if you need to know who to talk to over there, definitely we can give you who those liaisons are, if you will, so that you can act. The other thing that might be helpful, council member, is if you have any of your team that wants to have access to looking at eCivis and the search engine, just to see, hey, are there opportunities for playground equipment or whatever, whether it be at the federal, state, or foundational level, we can give them access because, you know, I think identifying, hey, why is this grant opportunity not something we're going for? Or, hey, Parks Department, are you going for it? Then I think it would help to spark that conversation. That would be similar to the response to the Fleet Department as well.
Great.
So if you just let me know who you would like to have access, and we can make sure they have access. And that offer goes to any of your staff, any council members.
Thank you. There are no other council members in queue. We'll move to the last presentation, legislative principles. Mr. Bill Kelly, Director of Government Relations. As Mr. Kelly, you're the only thing standing between us and a hot meal. What do you think your time looks like?
As quickly as possible.
Amen.
For whatever.
Carry on.
Good morning. You have before you the legislative principles for the 86th legislative session. These principles are based on previous ones passed by this council and affirmed every 2 years. In addition to our mission statement, we present these principles regarding regional cooperation, general government, public safety and criminal justice, neighborhood improvement and quality of life, economic development, environmental and public utilities, education, health, mobility. We have an added section on Hurricane Harvey on the last page. These legislative principles will help inform our legislative priorities. As a reminder, the GR team had constructed a website that details the progress of those legislative priorities at www.hughlegislativereport.org. With that, if there's any questions that council, we're happy to be able to take feedback with regards to these proposed legislative principles.
Councilmember Kubash.
Do you have any? Have you drafted any bills yet?
Yes, sir. The legislative ad hoc group has been working, as you're familiar with that procedure.
Do we have any here yet?
No, sir. These are the legislative principles, not the legislative priorities.
Who's on the ad hoc committee?
Councilmember Cohen was our chair once again. We had Councilmember Martin, Councilmember Christie, Councilmember Edwards, and Councilmember Robinson. It's the ad hoc group.
Yeah, I certainly am disappointed that I wasn't selected for that group, and I'd like to let that be known, because I do everything I can to support good legislation, and I certainly have relationships with legislators, so I'm very disappointed that I wasn't chosen for that group. So I just want to voice that. Thank you very much.
And I will gladly relinquish my spot. I didn't do a very good job last year, as Mayor Pro Tem just reminded me, to Councilmember Kubash. So I would gladly give you my spot. So moved. Councilmember Knox.
Thank you. I just have one question here under your public safety and criminal justice principles. The next to last one says support legislative efforts to prevent and to combat violent crimes by repeat violent offenders and support legislation to reduce gun violence. So we're evidently in favor of knife violence or bludgeoning violence, or why is the term gun violence in there? Why aren't we wanting to support legislation to reduce violence?
Well, Councilmember, the mayor has established a commission to reduce gun violence, and we specifically added that terminology to respect that commission's work.
That's a political statement is what we're making there.
I would say that it...
Because honestly, I'm against family violence, I'm against child violence, I'm against bullying, I'm against all kinds of violence, and I think as a principle, that's what we should be doing. Gun violence is a part of the fight against violence. This, to me, smacks of a political shenanigan, basically. It's just it's a way to get gun violence back in the news media for political purposes. So I'd like to see that removed and just take the word gun out.
I invite you to come to the 1 p.m. press conference where we'll talk about domestic violence. We don't have that enumerated in here either.
I know,
however, I think it's...
But it all is covered under violence, right?
I do not think the enumeration of gun violence, when the mayor has specifically named a committee, engaged stakeholders citywide.
But we're talking about a principle here, a city principle, not a committee meeting. We're not talking about anything that has to do with the mayor's commission on family violence or a mayor's commission on gun violence or the mayor's commission on any violence. We're talking about a city principle here that says we are evidently opposed to, or we're going to support to reduce gun violence, and I guess, and also violence committed by repeat violent offenders. But what about violence in general? Surely we're opposed to that.
I would say, Councilmember, this is also reflective of a number of the proposals that we've had in. This isn't something that's made in a vacuum. We've had numerous state hearings in this interim specifically focused on gun violence. I do not think the Texas legislature is ignoring every other type of violence. I think that they specifically wanted to address this because, as you said, this is in the political discussion right now. That's why we included it on there.
I think principles should transcend.
We're going to need to have you go back into the queue, Councilmember Knox.
That's all right. I'm done.
Mayor Pro Tem Cohen.
Thank you. With regards to Councilmember Kubash's comments, and I appreciate the committee was put together so it's represent various individuals, but the point being that this is a set of principles, and as soon as we have clear legislation that we're going to be advocating for, then clearly someone like you who has connections with certain legislators, or I think everyone on the table probably has relationships with different legislatures. That's when we really need people. Once the actual legislation is put in place and we're trying to get something passed, then we need people to contact the legislators that they're most familiar with. So we appreciate that.
Councilmember Christie.
Officer Knox, that was a good observation. I think maybe we could even expand the violence, the word violence and such. And Mr. Kelly, you paid attention in your class for political diplomacy and answering it. So that was very good. I'd like to go a yes to the second line, regional cooperation. We're doing that more than any time.
Absolutely.
And to keep pounding, preserving local decision-making, which the state legislature is trying to take away, and ending unfunded state mandates. Those are good goals to hit. Under education, my only caveat is let's not expand the dollars and bureaucracy going after our successful programs for youth in the summertime, enhance school programs and improving education in general, the literacy and the arts. We can do that, but be cautious of that city department expanding its financial scope. There's no reason for it to triple and quadruple in budget. Thank you, sir.
Sure. And just to follow up, the education principles are ones that reflected our work with Juliet Stepetch's office, so that's where that comes from with it. And then to your earlier point, if I get a chance to brag on our Harris County colleagues, they've done a terrific job. Donna Warndorf, the coordination we have both at the ongoing federal advocacy work, I'm sure we're going to do just like we did last session on it, very much hand in hand at the state level. So just want to be very complimentary to our Harris County friends.
Councilmember Gallegos.
Thank you. In regards to the public safety criminal justice support legislation to address the growing problem of substance abuse, and then it goes to the bottom line of that, efforts to treat addiction as a substance use issue instead of a criminal justice issue. How are we going to go about trying to do that?
I would point to yesterday's opening of the Ed Emmett Jail Diversion Program as one of the foremost signature achievements in that. It was $20 million that the city of Houston had helped advocate for on behalf of Harris County. The money goes directly to the judge's office. It's now been transferred to the Harris Center. So instead of incarcerating a number of these individuals, now they're, and these are nonviolent offenses, typically trespassing is one of the largest ones. So instead of creating an arrest record, going through the criminal justice setting, it is transferred into one that is more appropriate for the medical help that is needed for these individuals, both with mental health as well as substance use. Substance use, I know we talk a lot about mental health, but when you talk about access for services for substance use, there is such a dearth in the state of Texas with regards to that access. So advocating for monetary figures that have helped fund that program in particular is one that immediately comes to mind on it. And that's directly funded by the state.
Right, great. Yeah, well, I think that's a great idea instead of incarcerating them to get them some help, so that's great. Now, quickly looking over this information you provided, I don't see anything on here in regards to, I know at the last legislative session, we were trying to put a little more teeth in regards to the no parking on the grass ordinance. Are we attempting to do something again this year since it did not pass at the last legislative session? I know district council members, that's a big issue that we have where residents are claiming that they go through the process of doing the petition of no parking on the grass, but yet when they have it in place, we're not enforcing it on a timely manner. So can you address that, please?
Sure. Councilman, I think as far as principles go, I think that would fall under the neighborhood improvement and quality of life, kind of general principles about assisting homeowners and strengthening neighborhoods. As far as the individual legislative priority, we didn't have any council members' offices submit that with regards to creating it. So if folks are interested in it, we're more than welcome to talk to my office. It was something that we were able to get through the House last time, but weren't able to get it through the Senate. So,
and what was the problem at the Senate?
Say it again.
What was the problem at the Senate?
In the Senate, Senator Betancourt said we should have a citywide referendum on parking in yards at one point. I really didn't understand and do thank members, Senator Donna Campbell in particular, that agreed with the decriminalization of the parking in yard, instead put it in civil enforcement where we could have not just HPD issuing the tickets, but other city officials that would better able to be able to do the you look at the revenue we've collected on it. It is not like the city is making a lot of money on this. It's more for the neighborhood protection aspect, and that the fact that the neighborhoods have to opt in with petition signatures on it. I just don't know what the opposition came from. I think it may be just them against the city of Houston situation on it, but we're happy to be able to go at it again and provide them with additional information. And I will say, I think a number of council members, Councilmember Stardig, had helped last year calling to the senator's office, being able to say this is something that we have reviewed and vetted and are supporting. So we're happy to be able to take up that task again if council wants us to be able to pursue that.
Well, I, as a district council member, I definitely would like for you to pick this up again. I know that we are getting phone calls from neighborhoods that have gone through the process of doing the petition, but yet they feel like we're not enforcing it. And I understand, what I understand is that HPD, when they go to the door of the homeowner because there's someone's car parked on their front yard, if the owner of the vehicle is not there or they don't admit that they own that vehicle, they can't do anything. So we need to take care of that issue. So that way, hopefully, Department of Neighborhoods and HPD can go and knock on the door and just give the citation if they see a car on the front yard, even if they...
Councilmember, can you get back in the queue for us?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Castex Tatum.
Just want to reiterate what Councilmember Gallegos is saying. We would definitely be happy to support that legislation from District K as well, because same issue, we have neighborhoods that are petitioning for PYP. They do all the work to get it in place, and then there's no enforcement. So we would definitely be in support of that as well.
And I think, to your point, Councilmember, you had a lot of good support. State Representative Jean Wu carried it for us in the House. We were able to talk about those exact conversations and get it there. I think if we have that repeat conversation with the Senate, folks will have more of a context about what we're trying to do. By decriminalizing, we don't have to find an individual. By having it be a civil citation, we can just issue the citation and not have to find the individual with it. So that's what we were hoping to do last session. We can definitely have those conversations again on it, and something my team's very familiar with and happy to be able to do.
I'm very much in support of going at it again.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Kubash.
Are these, is this ad hoc committee, is it open to other council members? Or I know that every committee that we have, when we have hearings here in the council, where it's always open to all the council members, whether or not they're on the committee or not. Is this an open meeting where I'm open for other council members to come to, or is this a closed meeting?
2 points on that, Councilmember. One, it is a legislative ad hoc group, not a committee. And so secondly, the group has already had all of its meetings during the last couple of months. I can pull up.
So the meetings are over?
Correct. We've gone through our legislative process as far as being able to get feedback from various different departments, from council members on their bills with it.
Well, the same thing happened under Parker's administration. By the time I learned that they were meeting, it was over. So that's why I got involved in fighting legislation that Mayor Parker had before the legislature, and I won every time. So I just find it very disappointing that I've been left out again. I mean, I'm not a chairman of a committee, and I'm not a vice chairman of a committee, but I certainly, and you all, if anyone knows, I never missed one of those committee meetings when I was on it last year. I went to every one of them, and other council members would miss, and they would send one of their staff members. So I want to voice my disappointment again. Thank you.
Councilmember Gallegos.
Thank you. Once again, I do support this. I hope you can place this on this legislative agenda so that way the city of Houston can work on this again. You did mention that there's, you mentioned a couple of state senators that are kind of opposing this. You know, I know that they're probably the first ones to scream when D.C. interferes with the state, but yet the state is willing to interfere with our city ordinances, and I wish they would stay out of it. So therefore, whatever you can do to put this on here, I have constituents that are calling my office. They've gone through the process with the legwork of trying to get all these the petition signed. They come to city council, they get it approved, and then we don't enforce. So they feel like it's a waste of time and efforts that they went through. So I want to make sure that we can honor the work that they did.
Absolutely. We look forward to working with you on that, because I think having some of those citizen testimonies can help crystallize in the mind of senators. This isn't the city trying to make a bunch of revenue. It's, in which we have never done. It's been a very minimal amount. It's being able to try and protect that quality of life that citizens have literally petitioned their government to be able to do. So both you and Councilmember Castex-Tatum, happy to be able to work with you and bring you up to Austin to help crystallize that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, council members. And just as a closing note, I noticed that we have Harvey as one of the items listed. Just wanting to highlight, I'm assuming that you'll include items including flood mitigation in addition to case management services as part of the ask as well. Is that correct?
We will be looking, particularly with Harvey, we wanted to state some general principles with it, because so much of that work will actually be contained within the budget bill itself. And so we wanted to be very kind of broad with it, but absolutely from case manager capacity, which has been an issue, to hazard mitigation grant, local matches, to the wide range of issues that come with that. We wanted to be general with it.
So thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. Kelly. There are no public speakers in the queue. I want to thank my colleagues for coming out. And before we adjourn, remind everyone that our next regularly scheduled BFA meeting will be Tuesday, October 30th at 10 a.m. Thank you.
We're actually targeted for these readiness fairs. Because at these fairs, they're provided with the resources that they need to prepare themselves for the job market, as well as employers that are present to interview them to see whether or not, in fact, they're a good fit for the jobs that they do have.
Encountered cases are wonderful.
Bring them an opportunity to let us check, to bring them how we can clear in their records so that they can move forward with their life.
The job training, removal, social services, to commit to hiring Turnaround Houston participants. The goal is to hire at least 500 people in the next 2 years.
They're going to have to have like yourself and make.
Listen to me. I am captain of the track team. And if I'm late,
she doesn't really think she's going to get out of here, does she?
Be nice. She's new. Hello, is anyone there? Ugh.
Wow. Even from our standards, you look awful.
Oh, sweetie, what happened? Me? My friend Becky got to talk to this super cute boy, and I tried to act like I wasn't jealous, but I so totally was. And then out of nowhere, this concrete barrier just popped up. Maybe it was a semi. You mean you were driving? Yeah. I mean, I know the whole eyes on the road thing, but this was a super important text. Maybe you have to know, Becky.
Texting? Great.
But it was only like 5 seconds, and I'm a really, really fast texter, so it wasn't even a big deal. Actually, has she texted me back yet? I wonder if they have Wi-Fi here.
Hello, I'm Ricky Dillon, and I am a creator for good. I think the worst was when I was in high school. When I just started YouTube, I was bullied in person at my school for my videos. A lot of my friends, they go out of the way to be kind to me, like my best friend, Shelby Waddell. I think just positivity just lifts you up naturally. If a friend is ever having a bad day, I just want to make sure they know that I'm there for them if they need someone to talk to. But I do remember like growing up, like in elementary school and middle school, whenever I did see someone else get bullied, I would never do anything, and I feel like I should have. I think I was just too afraid myself to put myself out there. So I think, looking back, if I could redo it, I would go back and like be the friend to that person that was being bullied. If you're watching this, I love you so much, and you are perfect, and you are the perfect you you're supposed to be.
Throughout human history, people have always worked to harness power to better their lives. Early on, our forebears developed rudimentary machines driven by wind, animals, and water to run these devices. These machines were state-of-the-art for their time, but as with all things, new ideas began taking shape that changed the landscape of how power was developed. Eventually, new machines, fueled by gas, steam, diesel, and coal became the norm, and are, to this day, still the primary way we supply our buildings, cars, and overall lives. And the demand is not slowing down. In recent years, power usage has increased exponentially. So planners have been looking at new technologies and ideas to help bring us out of the 20th century mode of power generation and into the future. Not surprisingly, NASA personnel are part of the core wave of engineers and researchers who are looking at ways to change how we develop power. While some of their ideas will have Earth applications, the bulk of their study is finding ways to improve how power is used and developed aboard spacecraft. This work will help us move past our current methods of power generation in space, allowing new and exciting technologies to come online that could be the disruptive force we need to advance spaceflight. Coming up on this episode of NASA X, we will follow researchers from NASA's Space Technology Mission Directorate's Game-Changing Development Program as they attempt to transform the way spacecraft of the future are powered, speeds, be more efficient, be a fraction of the size, and potentially cost much less than conventional methods. Space. Since the beginning, there have been huge in the 60s and 70s were state-of-the-art then, but had less processing power than a cell phone of today. In the more than 40 years since Apollo, there have been enormous changes in every aspect of spaceflight, not the least of which is in the fields of power and propulsion. So important, NASA's Space Technology Mission Directorate is taking steps to continue improving our understanding by ensuring that next-generation technologies will work as expected and help move us past our current methods of travel. They have broken power and propulsion up into two major categories. The first is in the field called in-space propulsion, which refers to the development and testing of different types of thrusters that are used in space. While the second area is called space power, which studies how power is generated on orbit, such as solar arrays, for example, and also how we store energy with batteries and fuel cells. To understand what future missions will be like, we first have to look at the space environment and how missions of the past have worked. Because of Earth's gravity and atmospheric conditions, we still need those big, powerful rocket engines that burn chemical propellant to get us into space. Once in space, current missions and those of the only a few minutes, then shuts down. Because the craft is not fighting gravity or atmospheric conditions in space, it just coasts the rest of the way without losing any velocity. Although this practice still works well, researchers in recent years are looking into new ways to get to destinations.
What we're really focusing on now is electric propulsion. And that differentiates itself from chemical propulsion in that rather than combusting a fluid and getting managed into the engine, and that's how you get your propulsive force.
This is generated by solar arrays instead of the chemical energy stored in the propellant itself. It is very attractive to NASA planners because by using the sun cost. An SEP system is usually considered to consist of the large arrays that generate electric power